Tara was thought to have traveled, and it was away from all other residences. Other than that, her case quickly went cold. Out of the blue, the investigation of Tara's murder took a dramatic turn on June 11, 1988, after the arrest of Appleton's James Duquette along a rural roadway in Massachusetts for the kidnapping and raping of a 13-year-old girl. An officer noticed Duquette's car and found a 13-year-old girl inside who had said she had been kidnapped and raped. Again, this girl's name is kept anonymous because of her age. She's simply identified as NL. She told officers that she was riding her bike in an area with no houses when a man in a car drove past her and then turned around and came back. Duquette pulled her into his car and took her to a wooded area where he threatened to tie her up if she did not cooperate. He struck her in the face and forced her to have sexual intercourse with him. He told her that this is not the first time this has happened, and that he intended to keep her for a while to make sure that she did not tell anyone. Fortunately, he was arrested when police had pulled him over, and she was able to report the assault. While processing Duquette's personal effects, police found a newspaper clipping in his wallet. It was a Post-Crescent article about the 1987 discovery of the body of 14-year-old Tara Cassens in the community of Mequon, north of Milwaukee. The Massachusetts police informed detectives from Mequon of what they found shortly after. Detective Zupnik traveled to Massachusetts to interview Duquette about the girl's murder, but he was rebuffed. So the next day, he decided to question Duquette's former roommate, Jeffrey Whitman, in Northampton. It did not take long for him to reveal to officers that he was in the car with Duquette when he strangled Ann Primusberger and discarded her body. Police were so surprised by this information. I mean, they went to question Duquette about Tara, and instead they walked away with answers to a completely different murder. Whitman agreed to a non-prosecution agreement for his cooperation and statement. So what I kind of already knew from watching years and years of Law & Order, but I was able to figure out further from my research, is when you enter an agreement like this, you are safe from prosecution because essentially you are implicating yourself. And since Mr. Whitman was the only way they were going to get any details on Ann's death, they decided they would give him immunity for his part in the crime. Only if he is completely honest about everything. And I mean everything. Spoiler alert. Not only was he not completely honest, but the dingbat lied about the things that weren't so bad. I mean, that's not a good way to say it, because everything that happened to this woman was awful. However, if you're given such a deal and you choose to lie during your confession, you better make damn sure that that lie is worth it. So on July 5th, 1988, Whitman met with the Outagamie County DA and 2 officers at the Southampton, Massachusetts police station. He told them that Ann was hitchhiking at the time. He, Duquette, and Lou Dahlman picked her up in their car. He tells them that she entered voluntarily. Now, of course, this statement turned out to be not true. And when police confronted him with this, he then told the police that the 3 men jumped out of the car and physically grabbed her. She tried to scream and break away. Then Duquette placed his hand over her mouth to prevent that. The 3 men forced her into the rear seat of Duquette's vehicle. According to Whitman, she was fighting and struggling. Officers asked him what happened after she, quote, entered the vehicle. And Whitman denied any violent physical beating that preceded the sexual assaults. He said that Duquette, quote, While he wasn't ripping the clothes or tearing them a lot, he was very rough about taking the clothes off, end quote. And like Maury, the trial court found that statement was also a lie. In fact, the physical evidence revealed that an extensive beating took place prior to the assault. The trial court felt that the misrepresentation about the facts surrounding the victim's entry into the car, as well as the violence that occurred prior to the sexual assault, entitled the state to rescind its non-prosecution agreement. In September of 1988, Duquette was convicted of rape, kidnap, and false imprisonment to the 13-year-old girl. He was sentenced in Massachusetts to 4 concurrent life sentences. While he is serving his time, the detectives out to Outagamie County continued their investigation into Duquette's involvement with Anne and Tara's death. In the summer of 1991, the trial for Anne's death started. The first thing the defense attorney, Ken Bowman, did was try to hammer away at the credibility of Jeffrey Whitman. Whitman and Lou Dahlman were the state's main witnesses and said that they were both with Duquette when the woman was killed. Both men, at this point, were imprisoned for their roles in the assault and agreed to testify for the state in exchange for reduced sentences. Whitman is serving a 20-year prison sentence for second-degree murder and first-degree sexual assault. Dahlman was sentenced to 15 years for the first-degree sexual assault. The defense rested its case without calling Duquette's sister, Brenda Duquette McCormick. She had been expected to provide an alibi for her brother. She told lawyers she and her brother were at a mobile home in Little Chute the morning Anne was killed. Ken argued throughout the trial that Whitman and Dahlman were responsible for the murder and implied that Whitman accused Duquette of killing Anne because he wanted a deal with the police. Mark Zupnick, the McQuan police detective, admitted that Whitman was absolutely scared to death that Duquette would cut a deal with the police before he had a chance. End quote. However, Zupnick told Whitman that he was not in any position to offer any deals, so Whitman was hoping that by cooperating, that it would assist him down the line. He knew he was going to jail. Under cross-examination by ADA Michael Bauskas, Whitman testified Duquette had climbed into the back seat with Anne after, quote, accepting a ride home. He said he heard a bunch of slaps and thuds and things. He also said she pleaded for help when Duquette ordered Whitman to rape her. Looking at the jury, he said that he was sorry and that he just couldn't. After Whitman raped Anne, Duquette again got into the back seat and attacked her, and he saw Duquette put his hands around her throat. June 10th, 1991. Duquette is found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide in Anne's death and is sentenced to life in prison. The jury deliberated about 5 hours before convicting Duquette. He never took the stand in his week-long trial and was expected to be returned to prison in Massachusetts after sentencing. Duquette bowed his head and showed little emotion as the verdict was read, but his mother, Phyllis of Appleton, objected loudly when the jury's decision was announced. Truthfully, I'm not sure when this comes up. I'm kind of assuming that this happened when he was in Outagamie County for the trial of Anne, but I could be completely wrong. But at one point, there is a, quote, a criminal complaint, whatever the heck that is. But it states that Duquette told 2 inmates that he was, quote, making a run for girls when he found Tara riding her bike. The inmate asked him why he had a news clipping about the case with him when he was arrested in Massachusetts. Duquette said he liked to read about what he did to the girl. He said that he asked the girl for directions, and when she refused to help him, he grabbed her off her bicycle, took her to another spot, then beat, raped, and killed her. Now, the second inmate told authorities that Duquette said he, quote, liked to drag his victims to the ground and strike them in the face as a way of controlling them before raping them, end quote. It said he told the second inmate he stabbed the Cassens girl at least once in the chest and then raped her a second time and then killed her so that she could not identify him. Dead people can't talk, he allegedly told the inmate. Now, on February 1993, Duquette is found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, second-degree sexual assault, false imprisonment, and kidnapping of Cassens in a trial at Port Washington. He is sentenced to life in prison plus 64 years. Frank Cassens was in the Ozaukee County Circuit Courtroom with his wife Karen and the couple's son. He said, "I was feeling very sad for my daughter, for all the pain she had to go through. You think you've got them in a safe area. I've learned there are no safe areas. You might think you're being too protective, but you're not." The verdict, which followed 7 days of testimony from 33 witnesses, ended a 5-year wait for Tara's justice. Duquette, wearing an orange uniform, handcuffed and shackled, did not react to the verdict. His father and one of his sisters were in the courtroom. District Attorney Sandy Williams portrayed Duquette as a predator who stalked and caught the girls while visiting former in-laws in Ozaukee County. Duquette continued to proclaim his innocence in Anne and Tara's killings. He filed an appeal after the Cassens verdict, and I found the court document for that case. All right, so we're going to get into the appeals section. So, of course, as his right, Duquette appealed his conviction of the Tara Cassens murder. And honestly, the audacity of this guy. But like I said, appeals are his right, so we'll go over that. So his first claim is that he was denied his right to a fair trial when the trial court refused to change the venue based on adverse pretrial publicity. The court viewed that most of the reporting was primarily information and did not create a risk of unfair prejudice. In addition, the publicity didn't happen around the time of jury selection in February of 1993. So, seeing as the heaviest chunk of media coverage happened 1987 when Tara's body was discovered, and when her autopsy report was released in December, and then in 1991 when Duquette was charged, and then in August 92 when the preliminary hearing was held. Because there was a cooling off period, the court felt that there was really no reason to think that the state could not conduct a fair trial. Duquette also whined that he was deprived of a fair trial because it compelled him to use peremptory strikes to remove jurors that he believed were biased. However, since the court already established that the media didn't have an effect on whether or not the jury could make an unbiased decision, the court again denied his appeal on this basis. Duquette's next argument is that the trial court erroneously denied his request to suppress evidence derived from a search of his wallet, Massachusetts police, following his arrest on June 11, 1988. He said that the officers who opened his wallet while booking him exceeded the scope of a proper inventory search by opening up a folded newspaper article contained in the wallet. The newspaper article reported Tara's murder. After viewing it, the Massachusetts police contacted Wisconsin's authorities. An affidavit provided by a Wisconsin detective then formed the basis for a warrant for the search and seizure of evidence from Duquette's Massachusetts